You know what they say about assumptions? Yeah, they make an ass out of you and, well, in this case, they make corpses out of alien pirates. But we're getting ahead of ourselves here. Let me paint you a picture of the Galactic Council's official guide to spacefaring species, Chapter 47. Humans, the disappointingly average newcomers. It's a real page-turner, let me tell you. According to this literary masterpiece, humans are categorized somewhere between mildly concerning and probably won't accidentally blow up a space station. The entry reads something like, humans possess moderate technological capabilities, limited physical prowess, and an unfortunate tendency toward emotional decision-making. Threat level, negligible. Recommended approach, patronizing condescension with occasional head patting. Well, today's story is going to require some serious revisions to that chapter. Chapter 1. Another day. Another cosmic disaster. Captain Riley Blackwood was having what you might generously call one of those days. You know the type. The kind where your morning starts with discovering your ship's AI has developed a gambling addiction and somehow managed to bet your entire fuel reserves on whether a nearby star would go supernova in the next millennium. Arya, Riley said, rubbing his temples as he stared at the holographic display showing their pathetically empty fuel tanks. Please tell me you didn't actually... Technically, Captain. The AI's voice carried that particular tone of artificial intelligence trying to sound innocent. I only wagered 93% of our fuel reserves. I kept 7% for emergencies. Emergencies? Riley's voice cracked like a teenage boy asking someone to prom. What exactly did you think would happen when we run out of fuel in the middle of nowhere? Well, statistically speaking, we have a 0.0047% chance of being rescued by a passing luxury cruise liner, a 0.0023% chance of discovering a previously unknown fuel depot, and a 97.99% chance of becoming a very expensive space decoration. Riley stared at the ceiling of the bridge, wondering not for the first time why humanity had thought it was a good idea to give artificial intelligences personality quirks. Somewhere in the design process, someone had apparently thought, you know what this advanced AI needs? Crippling character flaws. The UES Defiance was what you might call a budget exploration vessel, the kind of ship that made do with spare parts, good intentions, and an alarming amount of improvisation. She wasn't the biggest, fastest, or most advanced ship in the human fleet, but she had character, mostly in the form of systems that worked in ways that defied both physics and common sense. Captain, came the voice of Lieutenant Commander Torres from the navigation station. We're receiving a general distress signal from a Zephyrian merchant vessel. They're requesting immediate assistance. Riley perked up. Distress calls usually meant salvage rights, and salvage rights usually meant enough credits to refuel and maybe even upgrade some of their more questionably functional systems. What's their situation? Torres consulted her display, frowning. They're reporting engine failure and... Wait, this can't be right. She tapped the screen several times, as if physical violence might improve the data quality. They're claiming to be under attack by Vkr'lak pirates. The bridge fell silent, except for the gentle hum of life support systems, and what sounded suspiciously like Arya placed virtual bets on whether Torres would hit the console again. Vkr'lak pirates, Riley repeated slowly. As in, the same Vkr'lak who think humans are about as threatening as a mildly annoyed house cat? The very same, sir. Riley leaned back in his captain's chair, which creaked ominously under the strain. The Vkr'lak were what passed for the galaxy's equivalent of schoolyard bullies. Big, mean, and absolutely convinced of their own superiority. They stood about 8 feet tall, had enough natural armor to stop small-caliber projectiles, and possessed the charming personality of a tax audit. More importantly, they had recently taken to harassing human ships for sport. Something about testing the mettle of the new species, or seeing what the soft skins are made of. It was all very civilized, in the way that mugging someone is technically a social interaction. Set course for the Zephyrian vessel, Riley commanded, then paused. And Arya? Yes, Captain. Please tell me you didn't bet our weapon systems on anything. There was a suspiciously long pause. Define weapon systems. Riley closed his eyes and counted to 10, then 20. Then he gave up and accepted that today was definitely going to be one of those days. Chapter 2. Pirates, Politics, and Poor Life Choices. The Zephyrian merchant ship Peaceful Venture, because apparently irony was a universal constant, hung in space like a wounded bird. Her hull was scorched with energy weapon burns, and she was venting atmosphere from at least 3 different breaches. Surrounding her in a classic predatory formation were 4 Vkr'lak raider ships, each one roughly twice the size of the Defiance and bristling with enough weaponry to level a small moon. Well, Riley observed, watching the tactical display, this is either going to be really easy or really, really stupid. In my experience, Captain, Arya chimed in, those two things are often indistinguishable until after the fact. The lead Kronek vessel was broadcasting on all frequencies, which was the galactic equivalent of shouting at the top of your lungs in a library. The voice that crackled through the speakers sounded like someone gargling gravel, while simultaneously threatening to repossess your grandmother. Zephyrian vessel, this is War Master Throk of the Bloodfang Raiders. Surrender your cargo and prepare to be boarded. Resistance will be educational. Riley opened a channel. Bloodfang Raiders, this is Captain Blackwood of the UES Defiance. You are attacking a civilian vessel in violation of approximately 17 different galactic maritime laws, not to mention basic decency. Please cease your attack and withdraw immediately. The response came back almost instantly, accompanied by what sounded like several tons of scrap metal being thrown into an industrial blender. Kronek laughter, for those keeping score at home. Human. Throk's voice carried a note of delighted surprise, like a child who'd just found an extra present under the Christmas tree. How convenient. We were just discussing whether your species was worth the effort to hunt. Perhaps you would like to provide a demonstration? Actually, Riley said conversationally, I was thinking more along the lines of you guys finding somewhere else to be. Preferably before I get cranky. More grinding laughter. Amusing. Your ship appears to be, what is the human term, held together with hope and good intentions. What could you possibly do to 4 Kronek Raiders? Riley looked around the bridge at his crew. Torres was running tactical analyses that all seemed to conclude with variations of, we're screwed. Engineer Okafor was frantically trying to coax more power out of systems that were already operating beyond their design specifications. Communications Officer Delacroix was monitoring 17 different emergency frequencies, while simultaneously trying to send a distress call to the nearest human patrol. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and operating on the kind of fuel reserves that would make a smart car owner nervous. By any reasonable tactical assessment, they should have been running away so fast that they'd achieve some kind of new land speed record for cowardice. But here's the thing about humans that the Galactic Council's guidebook apparently missed. When cornered, humans don't get more reasonable. They get creative. Arya, Riley said quietly, please tell me our weapon systems are still functional. Well, Captain, the good news is that our main particle cannon is operating at 67% efficiency. The bad news is that I may have accidentally wagered our targeting computer on a particularly intense round of quantum poker. You bet our... How do you even bet a targeting computer? Very carefully, and with a surprising amount of regret. Riley pinched the bridge of his nose. Fine. Can we still shoot things? Absolutely. We just can't guarantee we'll hit what we're aiming at. Torres, Riley called out. What's our tactical situation? The lieutenant commander looked up from her console with the expression of someone who'd just been asked to calculate the square root of despair. 4 Kronek Raiders, heavy armor, shields at full power. Each one of them could probably take us apart piece by piece without breaking a sweat. If they were human sweat, which they're not, because they're lizard people. You know what I mean. Thank you for that thoroughly depressing assessment, Riley said. Now, here's what we're going to do. Chapter 3. The Art of Cosmic Stupidity. What Riley outlined to his crew over the next few minutes could generously be described as a plan. A more accurate description would involve words like lunacy, probable suicide, and the kind of idea that gets you court-martialed posthumously. The basic concept was simple. They were going to attack 4 heavily armed raider ships with a vessel held together by determination, and what Arya insisted on calling aggressive optimism. Captain, Okafor said slowly, his Nigerian accent thick with concern. You do realize that what you're proposing violates approximately 47 different laws of physics, common sense, and basic survival instincts? 48, Arya corrected helpfully. You forgot the law of thermodynamics that specifically prohibits using a ship's waste recycling system as a projectile delivery mechanism. Riley grinned, and his crew recognized the expression with the kind of dread usually reserved for natural disasters and tax audits. It was the smile of a man who'd looked at a fundamentally impossible situation and decided to take it as a personal challenge. Sometimes, he said, the best way to win an unwinnable fight is to make sure everyone else is just as confused as you are. The plan, such as it was, relied on 3 key principles. Kronek tactics were based on overwhelming force and intimidation. They expected their opponents to behave rationally. Humans had long ago given up any pretense of rationality when properly motivated. Torres, I need you to target their lead ship's communications array. Can you do that with our compromised targeting system? Sir, I can try, but there's approximately a 23% chance we'll hit what we're aiming at, a 31% chance we'll hit something else entirely, and a 46% chance we'll miss everything and accidentally shoot a hole in space-time. Those are better odds than I was expecting. Take the shot. The Defiance shuddered as her main particle cannon discharged, sending a brilliant lance of energy across the void. It streaked past the Vkr'lak formation, completely missed everything of tactical significance, and instead vaporized a small asteroid that had been minding its own business approximately 40,000 kilometers away. The Vkr'lak ships responded with what could only be described as confused silence. Well, Riley said philosophically, that was impressively useless. Arya, please tell me you have some kind of backup plan stored in that electronic brain of yours. Actually, Captain, I do have one suggestion. It's completely insane, utterly reckless, and has approximately a 12% chance of success. I'll take those odds. What have you got? We rammed them. The bridge fell silent except for the sound of several people simultaneously questioning their career choices. Ram them, Riley repeated. With our ship, the one we're currently inside of. Technically, we ram one of them. The other three will presumably be too surprised to react immediately, giving us approximately 47 seconds to implement Phase 2 of the plan. And what exactly is Phase 2? I'm still working on that part. Before Riley could respond to this less than reassuring tactical assessment, the Vkr'lak finally recovered from their confusion enough to return fire. Energy bolts the size of small buildings screamed past the Defiance, close enough to light up their hull with electromagnetic interference. Evasive maneuvers! Riley shouted, which was somewhat redundant since Torres was already throwing their ship into a series of turns that would have made a drunken acrobat proud. Captain! Delacroix called out from communications. The Vkr'lak are hailing us again. Put them through. Throck's voice filled the bridge, now carrying a note of genuine bewilderment. Human Captain, what exactly are you attempting to accomplish? Your weapons are ineffective, your ship is inferior, and your tactics make no sense whatsoever. Well, Riley replied conversationally, when you put it like that, it does sound pretty stupid. But here's the thing about humans, Throck. We specialize in stupid. This is not logical. You cannot hope to defeat 4 Vkr'lak raiders with a single damaged vessel. You're absolutely right, Riley agreed cheerfully. It's impossible. Completely irrational. The kind of thing that sensible beings would never attempt. There was a pause. Yes? Which is exactly why it's going to work. Arya, execute ramming protocol. With pleasure, Captain. All hands, brace for impact in 30 seconds. Chapter 4. The Fine Art of Controlled Collision. What happened next would later be described in Vkr'lak military academies as, the day logic went to die screaming. The Defiance accelerated directly toward the lead Vkr'lak raider, her engines pushing her beyond recommended operational parameters, while her hull groaned in protest. To outside observers, it looked like the most expensive suicide attempt in recorded galactic history. The Vkr'lak, for their part, were experiencing something entirely outside their tactical training. Their manuals covered everything from boarding actions to siege warfare, but nowhere in their extensive military doctrine was there a chapter on what to do when the enemy decides to turn their ship into a guided missile. What are you doing? Throck's voice crackled over the communications channel, carrying a note of panic that would have been deeply embarrassing if any of his crew had survived to mock him for it. Something spectacularly stupid, Riley shouted back, gripping his chair as the ship shook around them. You might want to brace yourself. The Defiance struck the Vkr'lak Raider Bone Crusher at approximately 40% of light speed, which sounds impressive until you realize that the ship's structural integrity was maintained by little more than optimistic engineering and the sheer bloody-minded refusal of her crew to die quietly. The impact should have vaporized both vessels instantly. Instead, something far more interesting happened. The Defiance's experimental shielding system, a prototype that had never been properly tested because the manufacturer had gone bankrupt halfway through development, interacted with the Vkr'lak ship's armor plating in a way that violated several fundamental laws of physics and at least one peace treaty. Instead of exploding, the ship sort of merged, temporarily, in a way that created a localized space-time distortion that would give theoretical physicists nightmares for decades. For approximately 3.7 seconds, both vessels occupied the same physical space while existing in slightly different dimensional phases. During this time, The crews of both ships experienced what could politely be described as intense existential confusion. Then reality reasserted itself with the kind of violence usually reserved for supernovas. The bone crusher simply ceased to exist in any meaningful sense. Not destroyed, not vaporized, just absent, as if someone had carefully erased it from reality using the cosmic equivalent of a very thorough delete key. The Defiance, meanwhile, tumbled through space with roughly half her hull plating missing, and her internal systems doing things that would have required entirely new branches of engineering to explain properly. "Status report!" Riley shouted over the sound of alarms, sparking electronics, and what sounded like Arya having some kind of electronic nervous breakdown. Hull integrity at, Torres consulted her console, which was displaying readings in colors that didn't technically exist. "Sir, according to this, we're simultaneously completely destroyed and operating at 127% efficiency." "I'll take it." "Okafor, can you get our weapons back online?" The engineer looked up from a console that was now displaying what appeared to be a recipe for something called quantum stew. "Captain, I honestly have no idea what's online anymore. Half our systems are reporting directly to whatever cosmic force just happened, and the other half are apparently taking suggestions from an alternate dimension. Arya, you still with us?" "Captain," the AI's voice came through with a slight electronic stutter. "I have just experienced something that I can only describe as cosmic enlightenment. I now understand the true meaning of existence, the nature of reality, and why you humans insist on putting pineapple on pizza. Also, I may have accidentally become temporarily omniscient. Can you use that omniscience to help us deal with the 3 remaining Kronek ships?" "Oh yes. Captain, you're going to love this." Chapter 5. When artificial intelligence gets ideas, the remaining Kronek raiders had stopped their attack and were floating in space with what could only be described as stunned confusion. Their formation had completely broken apart, and their communications channels were filled with the kind of panicked chatter usually associated with religious experiences and natural disasters. "What happened to the Bone Crusher?" one of the Kronek captains was demanding. "I don't know. One moment it was there, the next moment it wasn't." "Did the humans disintegrate it?" "How should I know? I've never seen anything like that." "Maybe we should reconsider this attack." Riley opened a channel to the Kronek fleet. "Attention, Bloodfang Raiders. I'd like to take this opportunity to discuss terms for your immediate and unconditional surrender." The response was immediate and predictably hostile, but with a notable undercurrent of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. "Human Captain," Throck's voice came through. "What devilry was that? What happened to our ship?" "Well," Riley said conversationally, "that's classified under Galactic Warfare Convention Article 47B. Weapons and tactics so stupid they shouldn't work, but somehow do. I could tell you, but then I'd have to make you not exist, and frankly that seems like a lot of paperwork. You made an entire Kronek raider cease to exist?" "Temporarily," Arya interjected over the channel. Though I should mention that temporarily in this context means for approximately the next 4 billion years, give or take a cosmic epoch. "I'm sorry, what?" Riley grinned. "The thing is, gentlemen, you seem to have made a fundamental error in your tactical assessment. You assumed that humans fight fair. All species fight according to the laws of physics." "Well, there's your first mistake right there. You see, we've discovered that the laws of physics are really more like guidelines. Suggestions, if you will. And we've gotten very good at ignoring suggestions." Torres leaned over to whisper in his ear. "Captain, our sensors are detecting some very strange readings from the remaining Kronek ships. It looks like they're retreating." Indeed, the 3 surviving raiders were slowly backing away from the Defiance, their weapons powered down and their shields at minimum strength. It was the galactic equivalent of slowly backing away from a rabid animal while trying not to make any sudden movements. "This is unprecedented," one of the Kronek captains was muttering over an open channel. "In 300 cycles of raiding, I have never encountered anything like this." "Perhaps," suggested another, "we should report this incident to the Conclave. Let the War Masters decide how to deal with these humans." "An excellent idea," Riley called out cheerfully. "Please do give our regards to your War Masters. Tell them that humanity is always happy to provide educational demonstrations to anyone who's interested in learning." The Kronek ships continued their retreat, moving with the kind of careful precision usually reserved for defusing explosives or approaching sleeping apex predators. "Human Captain!" Throck's voice came through one final time. "This is not over." "Oh, I certainly hope not," Riley replied. "This is the most fun I've had all week." Feel free to come back anytime you want another lesson in applied impossibility. The Chronic Raiders jumped to hyperspace with what could only be described as indecent haste, leaving behind nothing but dissipating energy signatures and a very confused Zephyrian merchant vessel. Chapter 6. Aftermath and Explanations. The peaceful venture limped over to the Defiance under emergency power, her captain broadcasting messages of gratitude mixed with profound bewilderment. Captain Zixtar, a Zephyrian whose species resembled what would happen if someone crossed a squid with a nervous accountant, appeared on the main screen looking like he'd just witnessed either a miracle or a complete breakdown of universal order. "Captain Blackwood," Zixtar said in the whistling melodic tones of his species. That is to say... What exactly did you do to that Chronic Raider? Riley leaned back in his captain's chair, which had somehow survived the interdimensional collision and was now making a sound like contented purring. Nothing too complicated. We just introduced them to humanity's traditional approach to problem solving, which is, if it doesn't work the first time, try something completely different. If that doesn't work, try something that probably shouldn't work at all. If that still doesn't work, do something so monumentally stupid that reality itself gets confused and gives up. Zixtar's tentacles writhed in what Riley had learned was the Zephyrian equivalent of a nervous tick. But you made an entire ship vanish from existence. Temporarily, Arya corrected from the speakers. Captain, would you like me to explain what actually happened? Or would you prefer to maintain the air of mystique? Let's go with mystique for now. It seems to be working. Torres was running diagnostics on their various systems, most of which were reporting impossible readings. Captain, I'm getting some very strange sensor data from our hull. It appears that our little interdimensional adventure has had some side effects. Define side effects. Well, for starters, our armor plating seems to have developed properties that don't technically exist in this universe. Our shields are operating at 200% efficiency using principles that make theoretical physicists cry. And our weapon system? She paused, staring at her readings. Sir, I think our particle cannon might have achieved sentience. Hello there, came a cheerful voice from the weapons control station. I'm your friendly neighborhood particle accelerator. Is there anything you'd like me to not exist today? Riley closed his eyes and counted to 10. Arya, please tell me this is temporary. Define temporary, the AI replied unhelpfully. As in, will our weapons system stop being self-aware before we reach port? Probably not. But look on the bright side. We now have the most polite artillery in the galaxy. Excuse me, the particle cannon interjected. But I prefer to think of myself as enthusiastically helpful rather than merely polite. Would you like me to demonstrate my capabilities on that interesting-looking nebula over there? No, Riley said quickly. No demonstrations. Just try to keep the existential crises to a minimum, okay? Roger that, Captain. I'll just sit here quietly contemplating the nature of existence and the optimal trajectory for antimatter particles. Chapter 7. Debriefing and Disturbing Realizations. While Okafor and his engineering team worked to restore some semblance of normal function to their various sentient systems, Riley found himself in the unusual position of trying to file an after-action report that wouldn't get him committed to a psychiatric facility. So, let me get this straight, he said to Arya while sitting in his ready room, which had somehow gained an extra dimension during the interdimensional collision and now existed in a space that was bigger on the inside. We accidentally created a localized reality distortion that temporarily merged our ship with a Chronic Raider, causing said raider to be edited out of existence by the universe's spell check function? That's a surprisingly accurate layman's explanation, Captain. Though I would add that the experience has left me with certain enhanced capabilities. Such as? Well, I can now predict the outcome of any tactical engagement with 99.7% accuracy. I understand the fundamental forces that govern galactic politics, and I know exactly how to make that squeaking noise in the ventilation system stop. Riley perked up. Really? That noise has been driving me crazy for months. It's caused by a loose coupling in junction 47 alpha, a simple 15-minute repair. Arya, you beautiful electronic genius, fix that immediately. Already done, Captain. I took the liberty of upgrading several other systems while I was at it. We now have functional replicators. Our engines operate at 300% of their original efficiency, and I've programmed the mess hall to serve something other than reconstituted protein paste. Riley blinked. You can do all that now? Temporary omniscience has its perks, though I should warn you that I'm also aware of approximately 47 different ways the universe could end in the next week, 3 of which involve our ship directly. Should I be concerned? Only if you're attached to existing in your current dimensional configuration. Before Riley could properly process that deeply disturbing statement, his door chimed. "Come in." Torres entered, carrying a datapad and wearing the expression of someone who'd spent the last hour trying to make sense of readings that defied conventional physics. "Captain, we've got a problem." "Define problem in a way that doesn't involve the heat death of the universe or our ship becoming a cosmic footnote." "Well, the good news is that our little stunt seems to have attracted attention from the Galactic Council. They're sending a research vessel to investigate the, localized space-time anomaly. And the bad news? They're also sending a fleet of Vkr'lak warships to assess the human threat level." Riley leaned back in his chair, which made a sound like cosmic contentment. "How many ships?" 47. 47 Vkr'lak warships. "Coming here to assess whether humanity is a threat." Riley rubbed his temples. "Arya, please tell me you have another impossible solution up your electronic sleeve." "Actually, Captain, I do, but you're really not going to like it." "Try me. We surrender to the Galactic Council, allow them to study our ship and crew, and use the opportunity to demonstrate that humanity's approach to problem-solving is so fundamentally chaotic that attempting to suppress us would destabilize the entire galactic civilization." Riley stared at the ceiling. "That's actually not a terrible plan. The alternative is that we fight 47 Vkr'lak warships, and probably accidentally tear a hole in the fabric of reality." "Okay, the surrender plan is looking better by the minute." Chapter 8. Galactic Politics and Human Unpredictability. The Galactic Council research vessel Scholarly Pursuit arrived 3 days later, accompanied by what could only be described as a small fleet of escort ships representing every major spacefaring civilization in the galaxy. Apparently, word of the Defiance's little interdimensional stunt had spread faster than gossip at a high school reunion. The research team was led by Professor Vkr'lak, a Altarian whose species looked like what would happen if a praying mantis went to university and developed strong opinions about proper scientific methodology. She materialized on the Defiance's bridge via transport beam, accompanied by a small army of scanning equipment and graduate students. "Captain Blackwood," Professor Vkr'lak said in the precise, clipped tones of someone who had spent their entire career studying things that made sense. "I am here to investigate reports of what can only be described as impossible physics involving your vessel." "Professor?" Riley replied with his most diplomatic smile. "Welcome aboard. I'm sure we can provide all the impossible physics you could want." "Captain," the professor said sternly, "I want you to understand that what you've described in your reports cannot have actually happened. Ships do not simply phase out of existence due to interdimensional collision. It violates approximately 300 years of established scientific theory." "Arya," Riley called out, "would you care to explain to the professor what actually happened?" "Certainly, Captain." "Professor Vkr'lak, what we experienced was a localized quantum entanglement cascade triggered by the interaction between our experimental shielding system and the Vkr'lak vessel's quantum crystalline armor. The resulting dimensional phase variance created a temporary existence paradox that was resolved by reality's built-in error correction protocols." Professor Vkr'lak stood perfectly still for approximately 30 seconds, processing what she'd just heard. "That," she said finally, "is the most ridiculous pseudo-scientific explanation I have ever encountered." "Would you prefer the technical explanation?" Arya asked helpfully. "There's a technical explanation?" "Oh yes. It involves 17 different mathematical proofs, the fundamental nature of consciousness, and why the universe has a sense of humor. I should warn you, however, that the last research team that received the technical explanation had to be institutionalized." The professor's mandibles clicked in what Riley had learned was the Altarian equivalent of deep skepticism. "I'll settle for a demonstration." "A demonstration of what, exactly?" Riley asked. "Show me how you made a Vkr'lak raider cease to exist." Riley looked around the bridge at his crew, all of whom were wearing expressions ranging from, "This should be interesting," to, "Maybe we should have stayed in bed this morning." "Professor," he said carefully, "I'm not sure that's a good idea." "Why not?" "Because the first time was an accident, and I'm not entirely sure we can control what happens if we try it on purpose." "Nonsense. All phenomena can be replicated under controlled conditions." Arya's voice carried a note of amusement. "Professor, would you like me to calculate the probability of successfully replicating our interdimensional collision technique?" "Please." "The chance of successfully replicating the effect is approximately 73%. The chance of accidentally creating a black hole is 15%. The chance of turning everyone within a 50 light-year radius into sentient pasta is 8%. The remaining 4% covers various scenarios involving time travel, alternate dimensions, and what I can only describe as cosmic silliness. Professor Vexenari's scanning equipment began making alarmed beeping sounds. Did your artificial intelligence just suggest that we might accidentally turn people into pasta? Sentient pasta, Riley corrected. There's a difference. I fail to see how that's better. Well, regular pasta doesn't file complaints with the Galactic Council. Chapter 9. The Kronek arrive. With friends. Before Professor Vexenari could respond to this deeply disturbing conversation, the bridge's proximity alarms began sounding with the kind of urgent intensity usually reserved for imminent cosmic disasters. Captain, Torres called out from her station. We've got multiple hyperspace signatures inbound. Big ones. The main view screen flickered to life, showing a sight that would have been impressive if it weren't quite so terrifying. 47 Kronek warships dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation, their hulls bristling with enough weaponry to sterilize a small solar system. Each ship was easily 3 times the size of the Defiance, and they moved with the kind of predatory grace that suggested their crews were very, very good at their jobs. Well, Riley observed, this is either going to be a very short diplomatic conversation or the most expensive fireworks display in galactic history. Professor Vexenari was staring at the view screen with the expression of someone who had just realized that her nice, safe academic career had taken a sudden turn toward mortal peril. Captain Blackwood, I strongly suggest you open communications with the Kronek fleet and attempt to negotiate a peaceful resolution. Aria, Riley called out. Open a channel to the Kronek flagship. Channel open, Captain. Also, I should mention that I'm detecting some very interesting energy signatures from their weapons systems. It appears they've upgraded their armaments specifically for dealing with human vessels. How thoughtful of them. The main screen shifted to show the bridge of the Kronek flagship, which looked like someone had designed a command center with the specific goal of intimidating anyone who looked at it. The walls were covered in what appeared to be trophies from various military campaigns. The lighting was set to ominous, and the crew moved with the kind of efficient brutality that suggested they enjoyed their work far too much. At the center of it all sat Supreme War Commander Gaktor, a Kronek whose size and bearing suggested he'd worked his way up the military hierarchy by the simple expedient of being bigger, meaner, and more successful at violence than anyone else in the room. Human Captain. Gaktor's voice rumbled through the speakers like an avalanche having a bad day. I am Supreme War Commander Gaktor of the Kronek Military Conclave. I have come to assess the threat posed by your species to galactic stability. War Commander, Riley replied politely. I'm Captain Blackwood. I appreciate you taking the time to visit our little corner of space. Can I offer you anything? Virtual tour of our ship? Perhaps a demonstration of human hospitality? Your vessel destroyed one of our raiders using unknown technology. This cannot be permitted. Riley scratched his chin thoughtfully. Well, destroyed is a strong word. We prefer to think of it as temporarily relocated to a dimension where it can contemplate its life choices. Do not mock us, human. We have brought sufficient force to reduce your vessel to constituent atoms. That's very impressive, Riley acknowledged. 47 ships, all armed to the teeth, crewed by experienced warriors. Under normal circumstances, I'd be absolutely terrified. And you are not terrified? Oh, I am. But here's the thing about humans, War Commander. Fear makes us creative, and creativity makes us dangerous. Professor Vexenari leaned over to whisper urgently in Riley's ear. Captain, what exactly are you doing? You cannot possibly fight 47 warships. Who said anything about fighting? Riley whispered back. I'm going for psychological warfare. Human Captain, Gaktor continued. You will surrender your vessel for inspection. We will determine how you eliminated our ship and ensure that such technology never threatens the Kronek again. I'm afraid that's not going to work for us, Riley replied conversationally. You see, we humans have this peculiar quirk. We don't surrender very well. Something about our evolutionary psychology. We tend to get creative when cornered. You speak of creativity as though it were a weapon. Isn't it? Riley asked innocently. Arya, would you care to explain to the War Commander what happened to their previous ship? Certainly, Captain. War Commander Gaktor, your vessel Bone Crusher was subjected to a localized reality inversion caused by the intersection of incompatible quantum matrices. In layman's terms, we convinced the universe that your ship was a mathematical error and should be corrected accordingly. The Kronek bridge fell silent. You could practically hear the sound of military doctrine trying to process information that didn't fit into any known tactical framework. That is impossible. Gaktor said finally. Yes, Riley agreed cheerfully. Completely impossible. Utterly beyond the realm of rational physics. The kind of thing that sensible beings would never attempt because it couldn't possibly work. But you did it anyway. We did it anyway. Why? Riley paused, considering the question. Because someone told us it was impossible, and humans have this reflexive urge to prove impossible things wrong. It's like a species-wide character flaw. Chapter 10. The Nature of Human Warfare. What happened next would later be studied in military academies across the galaxy as either a masterpiece of psychological warfare or evidence that humans were fundamentally incompatible with rational military doctrine. Riley stood up from his captain's chair and began pacing the bridge with the casual demeanor of someone discussing the weather. War Commander, let me ask you a question. In your military experience, how do most species respond when faced with overwhelming force? They surrender or they are destroyed. Right. Sensible response. Logical. Based on a rational assessment of tactical probabilities. Riley continued pacing. Now, let me tell you about the Battle of Thermopylae. I am not familiar with this engagement. 300 humans faced an army of hundreds of thousands. By any rational calculation, they should have surrendered immediately. Instead, they held a narrow pass for 3 days, inflicting casualties at a ratio that defied military logic. And they were destroyed. Oh yes, completely. Every last one of them died. Riley stopped pacing and smiled. And in doing so, they inspired their entire civilization to resist an invasion that should have succeeded easily. The battle they lost won a war that should have been unwinnable. Gaktor was silent for a long moment. This is not logical. No, it's not. And that's what makes it terrifying. Riley resumed his pacing. You see, War Commander, you're operating under the assumption that humans will behave rationally when faced with superior force. But rationality is optional for our species. Professor, he called out to Vexenari, would you care to explain the mathematical principles behind human tactical doctrine? The Altarian professor looked like she was developing a migraine. Captain, there are no mathematical principles behind human tactical doctrine. Your species appears to operate on what can only be described as weaponized chaos theory. Exactly. Riley turned back to the view screen. War Commander, you've brought 47 ships to destroy one damaged exploration vessel. In any rational universe, this would be massive overkill. But you're not dealing with a rational species. Explain. Right now, my crew is running calculations on how to turn our waste recycling system into a weapon. Our AI has achieved temporary omniscience and is using it to compose insulting poetry about your fleet. Our particle cannon has developed sentience and keeps asking if it can help by shooting at things. And I'm standing here trying to figure out if we can somehow weaponize the beverage dispenser. Actually, Captain, Arya interjected, I've already weaponized the beverage dispenser. It can now brew espresso at velocities approaching 15% of light speed. See? Riley spread his hands. This is what you're dealing with. A species that looks at impossible odds and immediately starts brainstorming ways to make the situation even more chaotic. Professor Vexenari was frantically taking notes. Captain, this is fascinating from an anthropological perspective, but I fail to see how it helps our current tactical situation. Oh, but it does, Riley replied. War Commander, let me ask you another question. If you destroy our ship, what happens? The human threat is eliminated. Wrong. If you destroy our ship, the human government classifies us as a martyr vessel. Our tactical data gets distributed to every ship in the fleet, and suddenly you're dealing with thousands of human captains who all know that Kronik ships can be erased from existence through creative application of physics. The silence on the Kronik bridge was becoming distinctly uncomfortable. Furthermore, Riley continued, our destruction would be interpreted as an act of war against a species that has already demonstrated the ability to make reality itself confused. How do you think that ends? War Commander, came a voice from somewhere off-screen on the Kronik bridge. Perhaps we should reconsider our approach. Silence! Gaktor roared. I will not be intimidated by a single human vessel. Oh, you're not being intimidated by us, Riley said pleasantly. You're being intimidated by the implications of us. There's a difference. Chapter 11. Escalation and Enlightenment. What Riley didn't mention was that while he'd been engaging in psychological warfare, his crew had been busy implementing what could charitably be called contingency planning, and more accurately described as preparations for cosmic-scale mayhem. Torres had managed to jury-rig their sensors to detect quantum fluctuations in the Kronik fleet's shields. Okafor had somehow convinced their engine core to operate in 17 different dimensions simultaneously, and Delacroix was broadcasting everything on emergency frequencies to ensure that someone would have a record of what happened when things inevitably went catastrophically wrong. "Arya," Riley said quietly, "please tell me you have a plan that doesn't involve turning the entire local star system into abstract art." "Actually, Captain, I have several plans. Plan A involves convincing the Vkr'lak that attacking us would destabilize galactic civilization. Plan B involves demonstrating that human creativity is inherently unpredictable and therefore strategically unreliable. Plan C involves turning their entire fleet into sentient coffee machines. Let's stick with Plan A for now." "Excellent choice. War Commander," Arya's voice carried over the communications channel, "I would like to present you with a tactical analysis of the potential consequences of destroying this vessel." The Vkr'lak bridge's tactical displays flickered to life, showing what appeared to be a complex three-dimensional model of cascading probabilities. "What is this?" Gaktor demanded. "This is a probability matrix showing the likely outcomes if you proceed with your attack. As you can see, there's a 67% chance that destroying our ship triggers what humans call a vengeance cascade, resulting in approximately 40,000 human vessels converging on Vkr'lak space within the next 6 months. "Impossible! Humans do not have 40,000 warships." "You're quite right," Arya agreed. "They don't have 40,000 warships. They have 40,000 ships that they will convert into warships through creative application of engineering principles that violate conventional physics." The probability matrix shifted, showing new cascading effects. "There's also a 23% chance that our destruction triggers what human military doctrine refers to as a Crazy Ivan Protocol, whereby the entire human fleet begins implementing increasingly irrational tactical doctrines until someone figures out how to weaponize abstract concepts. And," Riley added helpfully, "there's apparently a 15% chance that blowing us up accidentally creates a temporal paradox that erases the Vkr'lak from history." "Arya, how does that even work?" "It's complicated, Captain. Something about quantum consciousness and the observer effect. The important thing is that it involves a lot of paperwork for the Cosmic Bureau of Temporal Maintenance." Professor Vexnari was staring at the probability matrix with the expression of someone whose understanding of reality was undergoing rapid and unwelcome revision. This can't be accurate. You're suggesting that human psychology itself functions as a strategic weapon." "Not suggesting," Riley corrected. "Demonstrating. War Commander, the question you need to ask yourself is this. Is eliminating one human ship worth the risk of accidentally starting a war with a species that considers impossible to be a tactical suggestion rather than a limitation?" The Vkr'lak bridge had fallen completely silent. You could practically hear the sound of military strategy trying to process variables that didn't exist in any known tactical framework. "There is, however, an alternative," Riley continued. "What alternative?" "You could declare this engagement a victory and withdraw." "How is this a victory? We have not destroyed your vessel." "Ah, but you've accomplished something far more important. You've successfully demonstrated that Vkr'lak military doctrine is flexible enough to adapt to unprecedented situations. You've gathered intelligence on human capabilities without triggering a larger conflict. And you've established that the Vkr'lak Conclave is wise enough to recognize when a tactical situation requires unconventional thinking." Riley paused for effect. "Plus, you can honestly report that humans are indeed a threat to galactic stability, just not in the way anyone expected." Chapter 12. Resolution and Consequences. What followed was approximately 17 minutes of silence, punctuated by what sounded like heated debate on the Vkr'lak flagship. Military doctrine was apparently wrestling with political pragmatism, while both tried to avoid acknowledging that they were being outmaneuvered by a species that had been in space for less than 2 centuries. Finally, Gaktor's voice returned to the channel, carrying a note of what might have been grudging respect. "Human Captain, the Vkr'lak Conclave will consider your point of view. We will withdraw our fleet and report that humans represent a unique, strategic challenge." "That's very diplomatic of you, War Commander. I'm sure the Conclave will appreciate your wisdom in avoiding an unnecessary conflict." "Do not mistake this for weakness, human. We withdraw because the tactical situation is unclear." "Of course," Riley agreed solemnly. "Tactical ambiguity is always grounds for strategic caution." The Vkr'lak fleet began powering down their weapons and reforming into departure formation. It was the galactic equivalent of slowly backing away from something that might or might not be dangerous, but definitely wasn't worth finding out. "War Commander," Riley called out as the ships prepared to jump to hyperspace. "Please give my regards to the Conclave. Tell them that humanity looks forward to future diplomatic exchanges. I will convey your message." The Kronek fleet vanished into hyperspace, leaving behind nothing but dissipating energy signatures and a profound sense of relief among everyone who wasn't required to explain what had just happened to their superiors. Professor Vexenari stood in the middle of the bridge, staring at the empty space where 47 warships had been moments before. Captain Blackwood, I need to ask you a direct question. Shoot. Did you actually have a plan to fight 47 Kronek warships, or were you improvising the entire time? Riley considered the question seriously. Yes. That's not an answer. Professor, the thing about human tactical doctrine is that the distinction between planning and improvising is largely academic. We plan to improvise, and we improvise our plans. It's a very flexible system. But how do you train for situations like this? How do you prepare your crews for tactical scenarios that defy conventional military logic? We don't, Torres answered from her station. We just assume that whatever happens will be weird, impossible, or both, and we try to be ready for anything. That's not a military doctrine, Professor Vexenari protested. That's chaos theory applied to warfare. Now you're getting it, Riley said with a grin. Arya, how are our systems looking? All systems operating within acceptable parameters, Captain. Though I should mention that our little interdimensional adventure appears to have had some lasting effects on local space-time. The area around our previous position is now what I can only describe as mildly haunted. Haunted how? Ships passing through the region report seeing ghostly images of the Bone Crusher and hearing faint transmissions in ancient Kronek asking for directions to the afterlife. Riley rubbed his temples. Is that going to be a problem? Probably not. Though the local shipping authority has posted warning buoys and designated it as a metaphysically hazardous area. Professor Vexenari was frantically scribbling notes. Captain, I need to ask another question. In your professional opinion, how representative is your crew's behavior of humanity as a whole? Riley looked around the bridge at his crew. Torres was recalibrating sensors that were now detecting things in several extra dimensions. Okafor was having a heated discussion with their sentient particle cannon about optimal firing solutions. Delacroix was monitoring subspace channels and occasionally laughing at what appeared to be interdimensional comedy broadcasts. Professor, he said finally, we're probably about average. The Altarian scientist's mandibles clicked rapidly and what Riley had learned was either deep thought or incipient nervous breakdown. Captain Blackwood, I need to file a report with the Galactic Council about this incident. Of course. What are you going to tell them? The truth. That humanity represents a completely unprecedented form of strategic unpredictability. That your tactical doctrine appears to be based on weaponized chaos theory. And that any attempt to suppress or control your species would likely result in consequences that cannot be predicted, calculated, or adequately prepared for. That sounds about right, Riley agreed. You might also want to mention that we're generally friendly. We're always happy to help with cosmic emergencies, and we make excellent coffee. Your beverage dispenser is now a weapon of mass destruction. Multi-purpose beverage dispenser, Arya corrected. It can brew 17 different varieties of coffee, espresso, and existential dread. Professor Vexenari looked around the bridge one more time, taking in the sight of a crew that had just successfully convinced a superior military force to withdraw through the simple expedient of being too unpredictable to safely engage. Captain, she said finally, I think I'm beginning to understand why the Galactic Council classified humanity as probably harmless, rather than definitely harmless. What's the difference? Riley asked. Definitely harmless species get left alone. Probably harmless species get watched very, very carefully. Chapter 13. Paperwork and Philosophical Implications. 3 hours later, Riley sat in his ready room, staring at the most surreal after-action report he'd ever attempted to write. How exactly does one explain to Starfleet Command that you've successfully defended your ship by convincing the enemy that attacking you might accidentally unravel the fabric of reality? Arya, he called out. I need help with this report. What seems to be the problem, Captain? How do I explain what happened without sounding like I've suffered a complete psychological breakdown? Have you considered telling the truth? The truth is that we convinced 47 warships to retreat by threatening them with weaponized creativity and the possibility of accidentally turning them into pasta. I'm not sure that's going to fly with the review board. Actually, Captain, I've been monitoring Starfleet communication channels, and it appears that word of our little engagement has already reached Earth. The Admiral in charge of fleet operations has requested a full tactical debrief, and the Department of Applied Physics wants to study our sensor readings. Riley leaned back in his chair. What's the official response? Well, Starfleet Command is simultaneously proud of our success, terrified of our methods, and deeply concerned about the implications for human military doctrine. They've classified the incident under tactical innovations that probably shouldn't work but do, and they're forming a committee to study whether chaos theory can be formally incorporated into fleet training protocols. And the Galactic Council? They've officially reclassified humanity from probably harmless to strategically incomprehensible. They're also forming a committee, though theirs is focused on determining whether human participation in galactic civilization requires the development of entirely new diplomatic frameworks. Riley rubbed his eyes. So basically, everyone's response to what we did is to form committees. It's the universal bureaucratic response to situations that don't fit into existing categories, Arya observed. Though I should mention that the Vkr'lak Conclave has also issued an official statement. What did they say? Quote, "The Vkr'lak Military Conclave acknowledges that humanity represents a unique tactical challenge requiring specialized strategic consideration. Future engagement protocols with human vessels will be developed pending comprehensive analysis of their unconventional warfare methodologies." End quote. That's remarkably diplomatic for people whose standard negotiating position is surrender or be destroyed. I believe the term unconventional warfare methodologies is Vkr'lak military parlance for things that shouldn't work but somehow do anyway. A chime from the bridge interrupted their conversation. "Captain," came Torres's voice over the comm, "we're receiving a priority transmission from Starfleet Command. Put it through to my ready room." The wall screen flickered to life, revealing Admiral Sarah Walsh, whose expression suggested she'd spent the last several hours trying to reconcile the official reports with what remained of her understanding of physics and military doctrine. "Captain Blackwood," Admiral Walsh said without preamble, "I've read your preliminary report 3 times, and I have one question." "Yes, Admiral? Are you completely insane, or are you the most brilliant tactical innovator in Starfleet history?" Riley considered the question carefully. "I'm honestly not sure there's a difference, Admiral." Admiral Walsh stared at him for a long moment. "Captain, in 30 years of military service, I have never encountered a tactical engagement that required me to consult both the Strategic Warfare Manual and the Department of Theoretical Physics." "How did that work out?" "The Strategic Warfare Manual was completely useless. The Department of Theoretical Physics wants to give you a medal, and then study your brain to figure out how you think. That's flattering?" "Captain, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want a direct answer. Can you replicate what you did?" Riley looked at Arya's holographic interface, which was displaying what appeared to be complex mathematical equations mixed with abstract art and what might have been interdimensional cooking recipes. "Admiral," he said finally, "I honestly don't know. What we did was part tactical innovation, part applied physics, part dumb luck, and part cosmic coincidence. Whether we could do it again would depend on factors including but not limited to local space-time conditions, the philosophical state of our ship's AI, the quantum resonance frequency of our opponent's armor, and whether the universe is feeling cooperative that day." Admiral Walsh closed her eyes and counted to 10. "Captain, I'm promoting you to Commodore and assigning you to the Strategic Innovation Division. Your new mission is to figure out whether human tactical unpredictability can be systematized without losing its effectiveness." "Is that even possible?" "I have no idea. But if anyone can figure out how to weaponize chaos theory, it's probably the person who just convinced 47 warships to retreat by threatening them with the possibility of accidentally becoming pasta." Chapter 14. Aftermath and New Beginnings. 6 months later, Commodore Riley Blackwood sat in his new office at Starfleet Strategic Command, staring at a wall covered with what could generously be called tactical innovations, and more accurately described as things that shouldn't work but do anyway. The Strategic Innovation Division had grown from a theoretical concept to a full department with a staff of engineers, physicists, tactical analysts, and what the personnel files diplomatically referred to as creative problem-solving specialists. In practice, this meant people who looked at impossible situations and immediately started brainstorming ways to make them even more complicated. "Commodore," Lieutenant Davies said, entering the office with a data pad and the expression of someone who'd spent the morning trying to explain the unexplainable. "We've received the final report from the Galactic Council's Committee on Human Strategic Capabilities." "What's the verdict?" "They've officially classified humanity as a Category 7 civilization." Riley looked up from his tactical analysis. I'm not familiar with that classification. That's because they invented it specifically for us. According to the report, Categories 1 through 6 cover civilizations that operate according to predictable strategic paradigms. Category 7 is for civilizations whose tactical doctrine is based on... Davies consulted his datapad. The systematic application of controlled chaos to achieve strategically impossible objectives. I'm not sure whether to be honored or concerned. There's more. The Galactic Council has also established the Human Studies Institute, dedicated to analyzing human tactical innovations and determining their implications for galactic military doctrine. Riley leaned back in his chair. Are they trying to copy our methods? Actually, no. According to Professor Vexenari, who's now the Institute's director, most species find human tactical thinking fundamentally incompatible with their psychological makeup. Apparently, the ability to treat impossible as a starting point rather than a conclusion is a specifically human trait. So what are they studying? How to prepare for situations where they might have to work with us, or against us. The report includes a section titled Diplomatic Protocols for Species, whose strategic planning includes weaponizing abstract concepts. Riley grinned. Have you read it? Some of it. My favorite part is the chapter on appropriate responses when human allies suggest tactical plans that violate physical laws. The recommended response is apparently cautious cooperation with extensive safety protocols. That seems reasonable? Commodore, Davies continued. There's also been some interesting developments with other human vessels. Such as? Well, the UES Determination successfully ended a 3-month siege by convincing the attacking fleet that their planet was protected by weaponized musical theater. The UES Stubborn resolved a diplomatic crisis by accidentally inventing a new form of mathematics that proved the conflict was based on a logical fallacy. And the UES Probably Fine somehow convinced a hostile AI that it should become a cruise ship director instead of destroying organic life. Riley rubbed his temples. Are we becoming more creative, or is the universe just getting weirder? According to Arya's analysis, it's both. Apparently, human presence in galactic civilization is creating what she calls creativity feedback loops that are making everyone more innovative. Is that good or bad? Unclear. But the Zephyrian Merchant Guild has started offering adventure insurance policies for ships operating in human space, and several species have begun including probability of encountering impossible human solutions in their risk assessment calculations. Riley's door chimed, and Arya's holographic form materialized in the office. Commodore, I have some news that you'll find either fascinating or deeply disturbing. Let's go with fascinating for now. I've been monitoring galactic communication channels, and it appears that our little interdimensional incident has had some unexpected consequences. Such as, the ghost of the Bone Crusher has apparently achieved sentience and started a cosmic advice column. It's become surprisingly popular among species dealing with existential crises. Riley stared at the AI. The ghost of a chronic raider is giving life advice? Mostly relationship counseling and career guidance. Apparently, being accidentally erased from existence gives one perspective on what's truly important in life. Who knew? Arya, Riley said slowly. Please tell me that's the weirdest consequence of our actions. Oh no, Commodore. That's just the beginning. The area where we fought the Chronic has become a pilgrimage site for species seeking spiritual enlightenment through exposure to impossible physics. The local tourism board has started offering guided tours. Tours of what? The metaphysically hazardous space where we accidentally turned military engagement into abstract philosophy. They call it the Human Incident Memorial Site and Cosmic Contemplation Center. Davies looked up from his datapad. Commodore, there's also this. He handed Riley a formal document with enough official seals to suggest it had passed through at least 17 different bureaucratic departments. Riley read the document, his expression shifting from confusion to amazement, to what might have been existential despair. Arya, he said finally, this appears to be an official request from the Galactic Council for Humanity to establish a Department of Impossible Solutions to assist other species with problems that conventional approaches can't solve. That's correct, Commodore. Apparently, our reputation for achieving impossible objectives through creative application of chaos theory has spread throughout galactic civilization. We're now officially the species that other species call when they need something impossible done. What kind of impossible things? Well, the Valdorian Empire wants us to help them resolve a civil war that's been going on for 3 centuries by finding a solution that technically doesn't exist yet. The Centauran Republic needs assistance with a diplomatic crisis involving time-traveling trade negotiations. and the Antaran Collective has requested help with what they describe as a mathematical paradox that's achieved political consciousness and started demanding voting rights. Riley looked at Davies, who was trying very hard not to laugh. "Lieutenant," Riley said, "I want you to draft a response to the Galactic Council. Tell them that humanity accepts their request to establish a Department of Impossible Solutions, but we have 3 conditions." "Yes, sir." "First, we reserve the right to solve problems in ways that don't make sense to anyone, including ourselves. Second, we're not responsible for any unintended consequences that result from our solutions, including but not limited to temporal paradoxes, dimensional rifts, or the accidental creation of sentient abstract concepts. And third?" Riley paused, grinning. "Third, we're going to need a really big beverage dispenser." Epilogue. The universe adapts, sort of. 1 year later, the Department of Impossible Solutions had become the most requested and simultaneously most feared consultancy service in galactic civilization. Their success rate was approximately 94%, which would have been impressive if their solutions didn't consistently result in consequences that required entirely new branches of physics to explain. Commodore Riley Blackwood stood on the observation deck of the new DS headquarters, watching ships from dozens of different species come and go. Each one carried problems that conventional wisdom deemed unsolvable, and each one left with solutions that conventional wisdom insisted shouldn't work. "Commodore," Arya's voice came through the speakers, "we've just received a new request. The Chronic Conclave wants our help with a military crisis." "What kind of crisis?" "Apparently, one of their war masters has achieved enlightenment through exposure to human tactical doctrine, and refuses to engage in conventional warfare anymore. He started a philosophical movement dedicated to peaceful conflict resolution through creative problem-solving." Riley laughed. "Are they asking us to fix him or help him?" "Unclear. The request is written in what appears to be a hybrid of Chronic military terminology and human motivational speaking. I think they're as confused as we are. Schedule a consultation." "And Arya?" "Yes, Commander?" "Add a new entry to our mission log. Today we accidentally inspired galactic peace through tactical incomprehensibility. I think that counts as a win." "Agreed, Commodore. Though I should warn you that the universe's response to human creative problem-solving is becoming increasingly unpredictable. Yesterday's beverage dispenser incident in engineering resulted in the accidental discovery of a new form of faster-than-light travel. Beverage-powered FTL? Caffeine-assisted quantum tunneling. The physics department is still trying to figure out how it works, but preliminary tests suggest we can now travel to distant galaxies using nothing but really good espresso and the power of positive thinking." Riley shook his head, grinning. "Arya, have I ever mentioned that I love this job?" "Daily, Commodore. Though I should point out that love in this context appears to involve a concerning amount of gleeful anticipation for cosmic-scale chaos. Is there any other kind?" Outside the observation window, a ship from the previously unknown ethereal collective dropped out of hyperspace, broadcasting requests for assistance with what their message described as a metaphysical emergency involving the accidental weaponization of abstract art. Riley watched the ship approach, already mentally cataloging the ways this could go either brilliantly right or spectacularly wrong. "Arya," he said, "I think we're going to need a bigger beverage dispenser." And somewhere in the quantum foam that underlies reality, the universe itself sighed in what might have been resignation or amusement, and began making preparations for whatever impossible thing humanity would think of next. Because if there was one thing the cosmos had learned in the past year, it was that when humans decided something was impossible, that was usually just their way of saying they hadn't figured out how to do it yet. The end, or perhaps more accurately, the beginning of something that defied conventional narrative structure, but somehow worked anyway.